Ukraine was able to pull off quite a stunning surprise drone attack within Russia, deep inside of Russia on Russian air bases. We can put some of these images up on the screen that have come out. So a swarm of drones that had been smuggled into the country, and I'll give you some more details of the operation in just a moment, were able to attack a bunch of Russian warplanes. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming that over 40 of these Russian warplanes were hit in an operation that is being called Spiderweb. And this is some of the video that they released where you can see these fighter jets that are, on fire and had been targeted. This happened at not just one base, but a number of them, even so as far away as Siberia. So they were able to penetrate deep inside of Russian territory and, strike a significant blow against Russia's offensive air capabilities, including some of these warplanes are, critical in terms of the nuclear triad. Here you have, this gets to some of the details of the operations. You can see these drones flying out of these semi-trucks that had been positioned in strategic places. The expectation is that the drivers of these trucks may not have even known what they were transporting. These drones were sealed, and they're tiny things. You could see there. They look like children's toys. Yeah. They were sealed inside of the top of these crates. So you had like the crate, and then there was like a false lid on the crate where the drones were inside of there. And then there was an ability for the Ukrainians to remote control, open the lids of these crates, and release these drones, again, you can see one of them and how small they are, into the air to go and hit their targets. The Ukrainians are saying that this operation was more than 18 months in the making. And, obviously, context here is you have some negotiations that are ongoing. You also have the Russians have been able to take a significant amount of territory in recent days, and Putin seems, pretty intransigent in terms of bending at all in the context of peace negotiations. So, this could be an attempt to demonstrate, hey, we still have a lot of capability and we can still cause you pain even deep within your own territory. I can put this tear sheet up on the screen. I'll just read a little bit of this and make sure I have all the details right. Ukraine claims massive drone strike on Russian bombers in Spiderweb operation. Audacious attack targeted 41 strategic Russian aircraft. Again, this is according to the Ukrainians. The Russians are downplaying the damage. We don't know exactly what the number is, but clearly they were able to commit some damage here to the Russian fleet.
Yeah, Ukraine claiming $2 billion.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Ukraine Security Service said it struck more than 40 Russian bombers deep inside Russian territory in what would be one of the largest and most audacious attacks on Russian territory in the years-long conflict. A source within the Security Service of Ukraine told NBC News the country targeted 41 strategic Russian aircraft. The source also released dramatic video reportedly showing a drone attack at an airbase located in Siberia, nearly 3,000 miles from Ukraine. The video captures bombers under attack with explosions visible and smoke rising from the scene. I think that's one of the videos that we just showed you. And as Emily just said, they are claiming $2 billion in damage. So obviously a very dramatic and sophisticated attack. Also one that, has potentially troubling implications when you're talking about a nuclear-armed superpower being made to feel very insecure within its own territory. And I know that it's sort of obnoxious to talk this way when Russia is bombing and bombarding Ukraine for years at this point, but we also have to acknowledge the reality of the situation and how dangerous and fraught it ultimately is, something that people like us have been warning about for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, people have been making obvious comparisons between the beeper attack and this one.
Yes.
The Crimea Bridge also, people may remember, that was a truck. It was an explosion from a truck. That was years ago at this point. But the infiltration of civilian infrastructure, this was more than 3,000 miles away. I think you already mentioned this, but more than 3,000 miles away as far as Siberia from Kiev. So incredible from a military perspective, and military experts have looked at that and said, this not only is just remarkable technologically, but this literally changes the game. This changes the future of warfare because, again, you can remotely detonate things with 3,000 plus miles of distance between you and, in this case, a truck, and completely change a war that's been going on for years and years. And Russia had been, Krystal noted this, bombarding Ukraine hard in the days before this. A lot of Ukrainian service members had died. So there's peace negotiations happening today, actually right now, in Istanbul. I want to put this next element on the screen. This is C3. Conflicting reports about whether the United States knew. So this is Jennifer Jacobs of CBS saying, administration sources told her that the White House was not aware that today's large-scale drone attack by Ukraine on the Russian military aircraft was coming. That's also quite an interesting aspect of this happening right before major peace negotiations at the same time. And we can put the next element. This is Arnaud Bertrand saying, essentially, it's the same type of action as Israel's pager attack, turning civilian supply chains into potential weapon delivery systems and making them inherently suspect. Arnaud goes on to say, it should be deeply troubling to anyone thinking through the sheer irresponsibility of the precedent set. And Krystal, you put this really well, that it's not an easy point to make when we're talking about Ukraine defending itself and responding to days of bombardment that had killed its service members. But the precedent being set in the midst of war is troubling because it's in that sort of fog of war. It's in the fog of uncertainty of war and desperation. And going forward, it is really frightening.
Well, here's the thing is, I mean, I think in a lot of ways the genie is out of the bottle.
Yes.
With, I mean, the drones, we showed you what they look like. Small, inexpensive, off the shelf. You know, this isn't just some, a superpower that would be able to procure and deploy these killing machines. You have, parallels not only to the pager attack, but I also was thinking back to the tech that was used on October 7th by Hamas. They also used low-budget, off-the-shelf drones to destroy and debilitate this multi-million-dollar, elaborate, high-tech security fence that Israel had put into place, complete with automatic machine guns.
Oh, right.
And so they were able to disable the sensors and the cameras, and that was the start of October 7th. So, like I said, in some ways, I don't think there's any putting this genie back in the bottle, but when you think about, non-state actors, when you think about terrorists and what they could do with this sort of, relatively low tech, relatively inexpensive tech, and then the other piece of this that Arnaud is really pointing to there, and this part is, a little bit different than the terror networks, et cetera, because of the extensive coordination that would be involved, not to say it's impossible, but the infiltration of civilian supply lines. I mean, this has long been considered completely out of bounds in terms of warfighting. And, it appears like that was involved here in this Ukrainian attack with Russia. And so you have not only the, troubling context of going after Russia's nuclear triad and Russia being a nuclear power and, at a particularly fraught moment in terms of this ongoing horrific war. But then you also have what this spells in terms of the future of warfare. And if you are the global superpower, as we are, with a $1 trillion defense budget, as we are about to be, you have to grapple with the fact that, nearly any actor around the world could acquire this technology and deploy it for horror, terror, killing, and death anywhere in the world.
Right.
So, I think that should be unsettling for everyone here and abroad and in Russia and Ukraine and everywhere else because of what it means in terms of the ability of even small ragtag groups to inflict death and suffering on anyone they want.
And again, so Jennifer Jacobs of CBS also reported that administration sources told her that there was no intelligence sharing, that the U.S. didn't share any intel and is with Zelensky and Ukraine for, quote, Operation Spider's Web, according to admin sources talking to Jennifer Jacobs. Ukraine gathered its own information. So this is...
I'm a little skeptical, but...
Yeah, and I'm wondering... I wonder if that's... So she's citing Trump administration sources.
Right.
curious also if there are Ukrainian sources that are making this sound like it was completely
All
Ukrainian. Or on the other hand, is this the U.S. saying that this is Ukraine so that it can continue the negotiations with sort of I mean, neutrality is not the right word, but that sense of diplomacy that's being brought to the negotiations. So no idea about that, but it does raise the question similarly to what's happened in Israel about actors who could not be prosecuting these wars without massive funding and resources from the United States, acting independently in ways that if you're Ukraine and you have different goals for how this war should end from the person who's funding the war, or the country, I should say, is funding the war to the tune of billions and billions of dollars, and you're not on the same page about it, maybe you're going to do things and keep them private that can escalate during peace negotiations.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility. I wouldn't take at face value the administration's claims that they had no idea in advance, because to your point, both the Trump administration and the Ukrainians have an incentive to make it look like we had no involvement. Because for the Ukrainians, it's a projection of strength.
Yeah.
Like, look, we don't even need the U.S. Look what we're able to do on our own. This, highly complex, and it certainly required long-term planning. Did require some, tech in terms of being able to deploy these things from the trucks where they were stored potentially for months and months. We don't exactly know. So the Ukrainians want to be able to say, like, look what we can do, and we don't even need our big brother and our greatest ally, the U.S.
Right.
The U.S. wants to keep their hands clean, so they both have an incentive, even if there was U.S. involvement, to say that there wasn't. However, it is also possible that, the Ukrainians are acting independently in a sort of, actually rogue way, which is also a disturbing possibility in and of itself. It didn't give it as much attention, but there were also 2 Ukrainian attacks recently within Russia that targeted bridges and caused actually some civilian deaths within Russia as well. And that hasn't been, I think the reason it hasn't been reported as much is because the Ukrainians haven't, I believe, claimed responsibility for those attacks, so it's still somewhat disputed. But the understanding, if you read the global press and if you read the Russian press, is they believe that these were both targeted by Ukraine, which does follow and does make sense based on other operations from the Ukrainian security services within the state of Russia. I mentioned this before, but I do think that this is important just to underscore. Put C5 up on the screen. This also did not get a lot of attention in the Western press, but Russia has just seized somewhere around 200 kilometers, made significant advances in Ukrainian territory in recent days, and looks like they're setting up for a what they're describing as a fresh ground offensive. So, there's been a massive Russian bombardment throughout Ukraine, and there has been evacuations. The reason they think it looks like it's setting up for a new Russian ground invasion, there have been evacuations of some of these villages near the front lines in preparation for potential escalation in terms of the ground invasion. So, again, plays into the context here. You've got Zelensky going into these peace negotiations, does not have a particularly strong hand because of wariness among the American public and among the Republican Party, and potentially among in the Trump administration, although it kind of depends on the day, of continuing to fund and arm them to the hilt as has been done, although so far the Trump administration has basically continued the Biden-era policy. But, that is not certain in the way that it was under Joe Biden whatsoever. So you have that. Then you have the fact that the Russians just have so much more state industrial capacity and just so many more bodies to throw at this conflict. You have some will within the Ukrainian people waning just because of the brutal toll that this war has taken on, Ukrainian men in particular, and their difficulty being able to get new recruits, and actually unconscionable tactics that have been used to round up Ukrainian men and send them to the front lines here. So you have Zelensky going to these negotiations with a relatively weak hand, and I think, it's pretty obvious this is an attempt to try to demonstrate, listen, we can still cause you pain, even if you think that time is on your side and capacity is on your side.
Yeah, Playbook, actually, there's a direct line from the Playbook author this morning. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, it seems, holds more cards than Trump gave him credit for. Their headline in Playbook this morning
was the point of this
Russia's
operation.
Pearl Harbor. That's the headline in Playbook this morning.
I mean, that seems a little
No, it's taking the Ukrainian spin really far.
Well, and I also saw people pointing out, like, okay, so if you're the Japanese in this scenario, doing the Pearl Harbor, then what happens?
Great work.
The thing that happens next is not really that great for you, so I don't know.
Great work, team. No, I mean, it's like what's happening right now. It's actually directly related to the negotiations. Everyone trying to get the cards on the table in order to make it look like they have cards and to not look like they're hiding any cards as the negotiations are ongoing. So it's really awful to see escalation right now. But if you're Ukraine, and I don't mean that about this particular Ukrainian attack, although the precedent I do find very frightening, but they'd been getting bombarded over the last several days. So you understand the timing of it, absolutely. We will see if the toothpaste can ever be put back in the tube, but I'm deeply skeptical of that, Krystal.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation at this point to try to imagine how this is going to be resolved. I mean, however, it's possible we just continue in this kind of like endless back and forth with Russia, continuing to eke out gains slowly over time, and you end up with basically a failed Ukrainian state. I mean, that's kind of what it looks like it's heading towards right now, unless there's some sort of a dramatic development. But, you know, I also have to say, a lot of war analysts, military analysts, have been quite wrong about this conflict at every turn. And while, you know, if you look at the industrial might of Russia versus Ukraine, if you look at just the manpower of Russia versus Ukraine, you come to a pretty clear conclusion about who has the upper hand. But I mean, with this ability to commit this type of attack, and with the modern warfare dynamics that Emily and I were just talking about, where you can use low budget, off the shelf tech, you know, those things can help to level the playing field, especially when you're talking about a group of people who are fighting for where it's truly existential and where you are fighting for your homeland. I mean, the U.S. has learned this lesson many times before. You come in with all the military might in the world, but it's no simple thing to dislodge people's sense of pride and nationalism and, you know, commitment to the homeland. So, you know, I think I think everyone should be very cautious about making any sort of predictions about what the military future of this conflict ultimately looks like, because there are more variables here than just okay, you add up the Russian industrial might, the manpower, X plus Y equals Z. There are more complex factors going in here, and in some ways that's precisely what this Ukrainian attack really demonstrates.
Yes. So we'll see what happens over the course of today with negotiations set to continue in Istanbul. Another, you know, thing to feel less than optimistic about, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately so.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.